Hi everyone. Welcome to another live broadcast where I do question and answers. This one involves at least the beginning, though you can ask any question you'd like to ask. This one I'm going to be talking a little bit about boundaries and relationships. But you're free to ask a question if you put it in the chat and put a capital question in there, all capital, then we'll be able to see that question better within the chat. And again, thank you for joining me. I'm sure we'll be having some people join us as we go along. Boundaries are something that a lot of people struggle with. I have struggled with. It's not uncommon at all. And there are reasons why that's such a struggle. And I'll be sharing some of that today. Boundaries tend to succeed when these types of things are present. Self-awareness, asking yourself and observing, where are boundaries important for you? Where have boundaries been violated? Where are those boundaries very flexible, if not too flexible? So self-awareness is important. Self-definition is certainly important. Who am I? What are my needs, my limits? What do I need to protect myself? What safety do I need in my life? And boundaries are a part of that as well. And also, those boundaries are very important for maintaining a sense of self. We want to know where I end and you begin. And when there are no boundaries, then it's all just very mushed together. And then again, boundaries don't tend to work so well. I've been doing a workshop. I hope you'll join the workshop. And you can sign up online. I've been doing a workshop in which I've been talking about boundaries, talking about maintaining ourselves using like a tennis net analogy, which I've used before, where I stay on my side of the tennis net, they stay on their side of the tennis net, and what happens when those get mixed up? I jump over on their side, they jump over on my side, or maybe there's not even a tennis net at all. It's just that porous. There just aren't any. There's not any net between us. And what are your own personal? And I think of this. When you have a shirt, let's say, and you read on it how you take care of it. Do you wash it? Do you dry clean it? Do you hang it up and not dry it? Those instructions are on the label and the tag for a shirt. Well, what's my label for me as a person? What are my directions that I need? And what are my personal direction label? What does it say for my own self-care? And I think exploring that label is very important. I think the people will ask me about love, and I think that's common. If I love someone, what kind of boundaries do I have? And oftentimes people will start with that feeling of love or connectedness, but they don't look at what are the capacities for boundaries in this relationship. How are the boundaries going while I'm dating or in a friendship? Because true love and true friendship have boundaries baked in, and those boundaries are that respect that we have for each other. And we start there. What are our boundaries? And then you can proceed more into the emotional love or the intimacy can follow from there. I've had some questions that people have asked of me, and as we go along, if you have a question you'd like me to help you with, you can write it. I would recommend again that you make it a short question, as short as you can, because it's hard to read paragraph after paragraph and then come up with the question. You could even start with the question and then put your background in there if you need a paragraph or something to say something about the situation. First of all, I was asked, hey, Jana asked Jerry, my boundaries get trampled on by everyone around me. What can I do? Well, Jana, let me share with you. If our boundaries are getting trampled upon, oftentimes they're not really boundaries. They're wishes or hope for requests. Um, the and or they may be things in which we feel, well, that would just be reasonable if you would do this. Well, not everyone's reasonable. Not everybody's listening to your wishes. Not everybody wants to follow those. Whereas boundaries are more non negotiable. In other words, they are where I stand, they are where I'm at. And if we don't have a strong sense of self, then we're going to have boundaries that are negotiable. We're going to have it be wishes. We're going to have it be wants. And people will read into us and will read into that. Oh, they don't have boundaries. I don't really have to respect what they want or need because they're not non negotiable. They're very negotiable and very flexible. So, what I recommend to people, and Jana, what I would recommend is then we don't start with boundaries. Because if you start with boundaries and everybody's always walking all over them, then if you start with boundaries, it's going to be difficult and it's going to be hard to pursue that. So I would start with the self. And I would start with starting to increase the love for myself. I would focus on that and start to focus on detachment, where I get to know me apart from what they want and apart from what they need. But I would get to know me better. So again, not starting with boundaries, I would start with me. I would also take a look at my negative or distorted thinking because there's probably a lot of that going on. And then I would also want to work on my anxiety and try to bring my anxiety down so that I can be more non negotiable in a matter of fact, mature way with my boundaries. And we can say that in a way that doesn't have to be confrontive or combative. We can just begin to be more firm. Again, if we start with ourself first. One thing I would suggest, Jana, you might try is when a boundary is broken or ignored, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? And where did those thoughts and feelings begin? Because they probably just didn't start with this current situation. You have probably been functioning out of these thoughts and feelings for a long time. And so taking a look at the archaeology of that and exploring the archaeology of that, I believe would be helpful in beginning to explore why boundaries are not being respected. So, where did these begin? Am I still channeling the patterns that I did in my family of origin or in my past? Am I still channeling that way of operating? Because oftentimes we do, and then we wonder, well, why doesn't anybody respect my boundaries? Well, because our boundaries weren't respected when we were children. So we need to go back, reframe, and reparent ourselves so that we can have boundaries that could be respected. You could do some journaling about it. You could get a coach or a therapist to help you with that, so you can begin to build more of a sense of backbone. But again, that backbone is not being mean or angry. That's not what backbone is. Backbone is have greater self-confidence. I can manage my calmness and my anxiety. I can manage my anxiety down to greater calmness, not perfect calmness, but greater calmness. And then I can begin to, uh, as we say, assert ourselves. Because many times I think we assert our boundary, but we're not asserting ourselves. And if you assert a boundary, but you don't have the self to back it up, it's probably not going to work so well. And I think even in his book, Boundaries and Relationships by Charles Whitfield, he talks about the importance of that. And I think he's right on the money. And I would recommend that, again, we start with asserting and learning about ourselves versus just asserting boundaries. Okay, here's my boundary. You're going to have to, you're going to have to hold to it. Well, oftentimes we haven't thought about the three stages of resistance that we're going to get with boundaries, especially if we're not used to doing it, and they're not used to hearing boundaries from us. If they're not used to it, they're going to say first, why are you all sensitive and why are you doing this? Kind of stage one of resistance, stage two of resistance is, I don't want to do that. This is what I believe we should do. And you need to stop thinking that way. That's kind of stage two resistance. And then stage three resistance is you need to stop these boundaries or else. And that if we have a greater sense of self, we'll be able to go through that entire process and come out on the other end where it is important for them to adjust to our boundaries than us adjusting our boundaries to them or adjusting ourselves to them. Jamie asked a question. Please tell me how boundaries do not mean I don't love you. And I've talked about that before in some different videos that I've put up on the YouTube channel here. And I think that's an important topic and a great question, Jamie. When we have relationships that are more enmeshed, more fused, more codependent, however you want to describe that, where we tend to have more fear, obligation, and guilt that we've learned from that. When we have those kinds of relationships, then any type of self-differentiation is going to feel foreign, awkward, and for many of them, unkind or unloving. Well, you're not loving me like you've always loved me by just going along and getting along or accepting my will and giving up yours. And so it's going to feel foreign to them, and they're going to say, well, why are you loving me so badly this way? Don't you care about me? And the truth is, my boundaries do not mean I don't love you. My boundaries mean that I wish to have a self in this relationship. It's not about how much I love you or not. It's about I would like to have some self. And that seems reasonable and appropriate. And actually many people do understand that. They just don't like it because it's not the same pattern we've always done. And if we, and so there's another formula also we can think about. Not triggering others or non-triggering equals I love you. triggering means I'm being mean to you. Well, you have to begin to unlearn that belief first, that that's not true. That's a maybe family of origin systems belief, and it triggers in our emotional system too. Those are family of origin beliefs, but they may not be true. And I don't buy into those. I came to a place where I'm going, wait a minute, I don't buy into that. Just because you're triggered doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means you're triggered. And that love doesn't equal me just never pinging you, or never disagreeing with you, or never being different from you. Let's talk. I got an example where, say, a mom tells her, 27-year-old son, I can't financially keep supporting you. So I will need to make some changes. The son becomes upset. And well, if you're just going to abandon me, mom, just like dad did when I was growing up, well, okay. Now, should mom keep her boundaries? Should she change them? Is she being mean to her son? Is she being unloving to her son? And she remembers, mom even remembers that dad wasn't very supportive and was abandoning of her son. And sometimes out of our guilt, we then won't hold to those boundaries because, oh, my son did have a hard time growing up, and I was married to him, and he was not very nice, and it just didn't work out very well. So that was all my fault. So I guess I need to financially support him until he's 87 years old. Well, that's not adulthood. It's neither adulthood or maturity for your son or for the mom. And um, and I think that's where it is not unloving to set boundaries because you're asserting a self, because you have to take care of yourself and you have to be kind and loving yourself. And I believe it's very important that we take care of self first. That's not narcissistic. That is adult, healthy life. I have another question that came from Jackson. Now, I paraphrased it just a little bit to make it a little shorter. Jerry, if I can't make up my mind about a lot of things, boundaries, whatever, if I can't make up my mind, what's going on? And I think a lot of people, when it comes to boundaries or self, they do have a lot of trouble making up their mind. And I know that's an experience we probably all had where I just can't decide what is the right thing to do. What's the right amount of boundary? Should it be a boundary A, a boundary B, a boundary C? I don't know. Or no boundary at all. I think that's um, a real struggle for many of us. And how I might describe what is going on when we can't make up our mind, we are in a state of confusion of others' feelings, thoughts, beliefs, choices, needs, wants, and experiences. And we have a confusion of all that within us that's others' feelings, others' beliefs, others' choices. Then we have ours in there, and they just all get muddied together. And if they all get muddied together, then we're going to go, I can't make up my mind. So we have too much of the other inside of us. And then we can't choose. And that's why a lot of people, I'll say, well, what would your boundary be? What would you choose to do? Oh, I don't know. Because if I do that, I'll feel guilty. If I do that, they'll be upset. And I'm going, so all of those choices are based on them versus you. Um, and that's kind of a sponge experience. We've kind of been spongy We've taken in other people's beliefs and needs and wants, and that's inside of us rolling around. And again, we don't know where I end and they begin. We're all just mixed together with a mixer, and it's all in there. We're going to have that struggle of, I can't make up my mind. We're absorbing too much, absorbing way too much. And now I don't have a clear inner life. It's too crowded in there. And that's when we'll also go, I can't make up my mind. I might suggest, Jackson, to you that you might use this question. And what I try to do is to kind of bracket or set on the shelf others' feelings, beliefs, experiences, needs, wants, thoughts. I try to put that on a shelf to decide what I would want. And I'll use a question like this, and maybe this would be of help to some folks. If I didn't feel guilty, what would I choose? In this situation, if everyone would be just fine with what I decide, and I'll go, oh, Jerry, that's great. We support you. We care about you. We love you. Whatever you do is fine with us. If I had that going on, what would I choose? That tends to help with the making up our minds. Now, we may come up with, oh, I know what my answer is. I may not be ready to institute that answer, but at least I have an answer. At least I know what I would want without all of that other noise. So I kind of trick my mind a little and go, if everybody'd be fine and everybody would be happy with any decision I made, what would I choose? That's more a true self answer, and it can get you to more clarity. Then, if you have trouble instituting that, then you may need some help. You may need to work on, or maybe read the book, Boundaries and Relationships. You may need to do some work on what do I need to do to prepare to institute that true choice and belief that I have. I hope that's a help to you. Let me ask, I think we have Aisha, who is, I see, or I'm not even sure what her name is. What if you have tried to enforce an intimacy boundary in marriage and one spouse still does not get it and keeps trying overcome with lust? I see an intimacy boundary. I got you. Well, and that's not an uncommon that is not an uncommon problem that a lot of couples get into that difficulty. Um, and I believe that once a couple is struggling with that difficulty, that you really want to, you're in a situation in which you may need a mediator or you may need someone to help you with that. I think the other thing that we want to do in that situation is, again, if my husband would be okay with anything, what would I choose to do? And that's where I need to start, because he may want to have many other things going on in the relationship or in the intimacy area, but you are a part of the marriage as well. And so your self matters in the relationship. And that mattering is very important. If he is unhappy with that dilemma or with your stand, then you can say, well, if you're unhappy with that, then maybe we should go and talk to someone. Or maybe you should go and talk to someone. Because the solution is not just for me to give in and do whatever you want. That's not the solution. Certainly, maybe in the past you have tried that. And I've had couples where that's been the case. They have tried, but it's just, it's just not feasible. And so I think having that heart to heart conversation with your husband or your wife, where you're clear about where you are, they may not be happy with that, but at least you are clear. And you can say, this is not about whether I care about you or not. This is about me being clear for me. I do care about the relationship. I do know we have shared life, but shared life doesn't mean zero boundaries for anybody. That isn't what shared life means, and that's not what marriage means. Um, so I hope that's a help to you. Is there another one down lower? I have another question. So I think, again, getting some help, particularly if you have that area or it's a conflict, that it might be good to get some assistance with that, because my hunch is, and maybe this would be a help to you with regard to that question. Usually, intimacy issues or even sexual issues are not what the root issue is. It doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean intimate life in a marriage is not important. It is. But it usually is not the real problem. It's a symptom. And so getting underneath the problem is what I've found to be most helpful. And you might need help with that, or you might want to read some books on, marital intimacy. I also believe it's important, and this may be of help too. Uh, what is There's a book that I'm thinking of. It's called, and I'll think of it here in a minute. Ah, I cannot. The oh, it'll come to me. When it comes to me, I'll remind you of what that is. It's a book about how couples uh, operate, and what things destroy marital intimacy, romance, and love in a relationship. And I really would recommend that, and hopefully it will come to me. If not, you can write to me and I can send that to you. Send me an email. I've got another question. Can certain boundaries be prohibitive to healthy, intimate relationships? I have a serious aversion to my partner expressing that they don't want me to do something that I feel would be very, I'm not sure what the next word would be. Um, the and yes, I think certainly boundaries can be prohibitive to healthy, intimate relationships. And I believe that's where having a unified couple is so important. And oftentimes, I feel it would be very important to my own healing. I got you. Well, and I think it is important that you do focus on your own healing. I'm not sure what that boundary is, but I do believe that can happen. Oftentimes, troubling boundaries come out of our own immaturities. And that's what can be problematic with where boundaries can be prohibitively a trouble with our health, our relationship, our love, our intimacy. But oftentimes, those kinds of boundaries come out of our immaturity. And I think about a couplehood coupleship and a marriage being a relationship where we, we, we don't go into it to have it all our own way. We have shared life, and accepting the other partner is so very important. Now, I understand that some partners are very immature, very dysfunctional, came from dysfunctional families, all those kinds of things. But that's where we have to say, you've got to step up and work on those things if we're going to have a decent relationship. And again, I think just what you were sharing in that question, that when someone sets a boundary like that, that creates difficulties for their partner, is it an immature boundary, or is it something that we want to work together on? And so there are questions we ask about those particular boundaries. But I know one thing we can't give up is our own sense of wellness, self care, love. Boundaries should, no one should be asking or putting boundaries up that inhibit that. That why would we want to do that in a loving marriage? And I understand marriages can be quite complicated, having worked with them for many, many decades, and I know it can be a problem and can be difficult. But no, you don't want to give up your own sense of, without knowing more about the situation, you don't want to give up your own sense of wellness for that. Even if you have to not, you can say, hey, even for this period of time, you know, um, that boundary is just not helpful for me. And if we are at a loggerhead, then we may want to get some help. We may need some help to resolve this. If we're just continuing to argue about it and repeat the argument, you're probably not going to figure it out on your own. And that's where we become more humble and more going, hey, we need to get some help for this, so that we can come to a place where we love, respect, and care about each other more. Another question I have is, how do I set boundaries instead of using resentment to protect myself? My father always builds trust, then breaks it by trying to insert us back into the old acceptable system. And you're right, that happens often. And how do I set boundaries instead of using resentment? Well, of course, resentment doesn't. Then we need to get wiser about setting boundaries, and we need to be wiser about the space between us, the togetherness and separateness spaces, and that, hey, I may need to have greater distance. If this is going to happen, I'm going to have greater distance. But then he may build that trust and then break it again. And it's like, no, that then I can't fall for the building trust phase. And I have to be careful about the building trust and go, okay, I see you're building trust. We're building that again. I think we need to stay in that building trust phase for about a year. And then let's see uh, if I'm going to jump back into the water. I need to put my toe in and see how things are going. Because if this has been a repeated pattern, well, then just because I kind of almost think of it as like trust bombing. We have love bombing where there can be trust bombing. No, no, you can trust me. I'll do this. I'll do that. No, I understand. Da 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 da. And then they go right back into, you've got to do it my way, or it has to be the acceptable way, and those types of things. That I really need to have a commitment from that person or from your dad about, I am different. And that's something you have a hard time with, I'm guessing. And so it's going to be difficult to be close like you'd like to be close, Dad. It's going to be difficult to do that. Um, and that when you are and I'm talking out loud now, I'm not talking to dad, when he's going to be more trusting or more love or more trust bombing in some way, then I'm going to be more neutral about it because I don't want to go to resentment, and I also can be more neutral about the trust bombing rather than going, oh, now dad's behaving well, he's doing a great job, oh, this feels so good, I'll just join right back into the system, and then we get clipped again and have to do it the way the system has to do it. And so we might want to provide just a little more distance between them and me so that in time they might respect me a little more. That, that even though I'd like to have a better relationship, I'd like for this to work out well, which I'm sure you would. But uh, then I wouldn't jump right back in. And I could even say I'm appreciative of the trust. I'm appreciative of this, but I would hold myself back rather than diving into the trust bombing until that pattern has either changed or has demonstrated itself to be different. I hope that helps. Um, we now do, I think, is this a continuation of the same question? No? Okay. We now do small talks weekly, and even though I'm fairly far away, it usually gets me hyper vigilant, afraid my trust is again misplaced. How do I give myself the reasonable expectation in our relationship? Well, and that's accepting the way the relationship is, and I would be hesitant about oversharing. Why do you? Um, can you pull that back up just a little bit so I can see that? When it comes to, yeah, when you're far away and you have small talks, um, and then you put trust in this and you have some hypervigilance, there may be a good reason why you would have some hypervigilance, especially if that trust or if that relationship has the rug pulled out from underneath you at some point. Then I think we have to take a look at accepting the reality of this is the person, this is the relationship that I have. This is the way they react and respond. I probably should not pursue too much trust or be too vulnerable in this case. Now, why would that not be satisfying? And I think that's a question to ask. Why do I need to pursue this relationship? I understand that we want to, and we'd like relationships to be a certain way. I definitely understand that, and we'd like to have a good relationship with family or friends and but we also don't want to be caught in our fantasies about what we think we can get. I mean, if this is a father, for example, I definitely would love to have the father who loves me, trusts me, and doesn't pull the rug out from underneath me. But if he does, then I'm going to have to accept that. Now, what kind of relationship am I going to have with him? What is that going to look like? And if I'm hoping to get needs met in that relationship um, that I feel need to be met, then I may need to take a look at those needs and meet them myself or meet them in other ways. And again, it doesn't mean I have to cut off dad or cut off the family member. It just means I'm going to have to meet those needs myself, or I'm going to have to meet them in another way. An additional question: should I lower my standards if keeping my boundaries lead to the relationship ending? That's a tough question. You're right. Um, should we lower our standards? That's and again, that's a indicative of problems that are from the past that are now visiting me in the present. Um, and certainly, you can lower your boundaries, and the relationship won't end, or might not end if you lower your boundaries. But then you're talking about a, a bad choice versus a bad choice. And again, when you get into those kinds of situations, it might be good to have some guidance to help you with that. Um, because, and again, I don't know much more about the relationship. Um, if you, if there is enough in the relationship that is good, and lowering the standards of the boundaries will not violate your sense of self, you may accommodate or negotiate with someone, because I don't get everything when I'm in a relationship. I know that. There's give and take, there's we-ness, there's I-ness. But if it crosses a line where it really uh, invalidates or strikes a bad chord in who I am and who myself is, then I've got to take a look at what am I going to do with this relationship? Can I let it go? And if I can't, why not? If I would like to keep it, are we ready to be mature and go get help to make this work? So we may have to take those kind of adult decisions that I can't keep violating my sense of self, um, and have a decent or a happy relationship for the future. It's just probably, and if you can tolerate that, that's fine. If you can't, then that can be a real struggle. And it eventually, when we have that kind of Demetra, when we have that kind of conundrum, I find what happens is the relationship tends to erode. It erodes that self love. It erodes the relationship love and the relationship caring. And it just tends to erode it. And so now the relationship is ending an inch at a time. Because every time we have to do this or violate my boundary just to keep the relationship together, then we've got a problem. And that's not a good future problem to have. And that's why I think that's when the red flag should go up and we should be alerted that there's a problem. And maybe we do need to get some help. Char has a question. How do we set boundaries with covert narcissistic parents? Is intentional disappointment one of the ways? Um, well, I think of intentional disappointment as one of the ways I stay unstuck in the relationship. Um, I suppose it can be a means to setting or a road to setting a relationship. Intentional disappointment is to get their emotional um, uh, umbilical cord out of me. That's how I think of intentional disappointment. If I tell my mother, I am your bad son. That's the way it is. Hey, what do you want to have for supper? and that's intentional disappointment. I've just said something that she wasn't anticipated, and I was okay with it. And she's disappointed because I'm not arguing with her. And I'm saying, no, I'm not, I am a good son, and, blah, 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 and I'm doing all that defensiveness. With covert narcissistic parents, um, depending upon how covert and how not covert, I suppose, I with narcissists, I tend to try to play it more straight. Though with covert narcissists, I think you can do some paradoxical kind of stuff like intentional disappointment. You know, uh, well, aren't you going to take care of me, Jerry? Well, yeah, Mom, I'm just not a very good caretaker. I know. I wish I were. That's an intentional disappointment response. That could work in a covert narcissistic relationship. Um, Otherwise, I do like to kind of keep it straight and go, Mom, I know, or Dad, I know this is what you would like me to do, but my preference is to do this. And again, that's more of a straight response and not playful and not so paradoxical. It's just more straight. And I tend to choose that more with narcissists. Um, because again, they might get more triggered with paradoxical or even sometimes playful responses. It depends on the people involved. Um, but I think that, again, the straight response, and then continue the broken record. Oh, but we really want you to come. We really want you to be here. If you're not, I think everybody would be disappointed. And you weren't here the last time. Blah, 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 blah. And go, well, Mom, I understand. You're right about all of that. And my preference is still this. That's the broken record. I agree or accept everything they say, and then I add my preference at the end, no matter what they say. Jerry, you're a terrible son that you're not going to be there when all the family's going to be there. You're probably right. I probably am a terrible son, but this is what I would prefer to do. And I do the broken record until they get frustrated or give up. Um, and because, and they also sense I'm kind of going to be immovable. And I want to kind of express that immovability, but not unkindly or meanly, just immovable. Um, Sage asks, how do I stay physically grounded when setting boundaries? I wind up being really clumsy, like I don't even know where I am physically standing, like I feel squeezed out of myself. Yeah, boundaries can really challenge our inner life and our inner emotions. And with well, I think the when setting boundaries, we have to do work before we get to the boundaries, which is grounding ourselves before. Even grounding myself, I've even used an index card where I put on there what I'm going to say. That this is what I'm going to say. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to say. I don't have to worry about that. It's already written down here. All I got to worry about is managing me and staying grounded, feeling the earth underneath my feet and feeling my feet planted on the earth. And I feel held up by the earth. And then I share what's on the card. That keeps me from clumsiness. It keeps me from, because if sometimes I have to do it ad hoc or just off the cuff. If I'm not used to doing it, I'll be more clumsy. I just don't even know where I'm at and what I'm doing. And so I might use something like that to be of help to me so I have less I have to think about. And I would think through what I have to put on the card. I would think over that and make sure that's what I want to say. It's best to set boundaries without a lot of explanation, short, to the point, and clear. And if possible, neutrally, to say it neutrally. That tends to be a better approach than, okay, I'm just going to do it off the cuff. And then I start explaining. Then I start defending. Then I start, doing things like that. Then I get more clumsy. Then I go, well, I didn't mean that. I meant, then I'm off script. And I may need to learn to be scripted before I can go off script. And I've done that to just, this is what I'm practicing. I'm going to say, and then I'm going to stop. I think if you've listened to a video of mine on the family dinner or the family prayer, I was a pastor at that time. My father had passed away. Everybody looks to me, mom looks to me, hey, you're going to be giving the prayer before every meal whenever we gather as a family. That was all decided without asking me, without consulting with me. That was just an assumption and an expectation. Well, if I don't really want to do that, what do I do? Should I say no? I mean, am I being mean? Am I being mean to mom? Am I being uncooperative with the family? But the thing was, it was really putting a burden or making a role for me that I hadn't chosen. I'm not the family pastor. I'm not the family's pastor. That isn't what I wanted to be. I just wanted to be a family member when I came here. And so I began to think, okay, what's my plan? My plan is to go to mom in a calm way and share with her what I'd like to do. I did that several times. She ignored it several times. So I knew we were going to come, that it was going to come to a head when we actually got to the dinner. Because I could tell she just wasn't hearing it, and we're not wanting it. It's my job, and that's all there is to it. And so I had prepared what I was going to say. And I felt nervous. I felt anxious, but I knew what I was going to say. No more, no less. And so I said it briefly in front of everyone. And then what I put on there is stop, say nothing more. Because otherwise I'm going to try to take care of everybody's feelings by talking more or apologizing or giving in or whatever. And I didn't want to do that. So I simply had it listed very briefly what I wanted to say, memorized it, it wasn't very long, and just stated it. It was something like, Mom, I just wanted to say that we had talked about this, and my preference was that I was not wanting to be the one who gave the prayer for every meal at our family. Silence. I wasn't going to decide who should do it. I wasn't going to decide that she should do it. This is our family. We can do whatever. And I also know anybody here could pray for the meal. All I needed to do was to express my boundary. And it was very scary. But I also knew when to stop talking. And let others feel the discomfort rather than me feel the discomfort of every time I come, I got to do this. Or I'll even avoid family gatherings so that I don't have to do it. And that would be avoidant, which I've done too. So I've done all these things, not so good, and then I've tried to learn how to do it more maturely and more adult. Jesse asked, can you talk more about building up our ability to go without love or approval? That is the love and approval of others, building our emotional backbone. And that's a good topic. And there's a video with that name, building up our ability to go without love and approval. And people have written comments sometimes about that saying, oh, were you saying we don't need love? Are you saying love is not important for human beings in life? Well, of course not. That is not what I mean. I don't mean by that. None of us need love. None of us need relationships. And none of us need support. That's not what the video is about. What the video is about is if we are addicted to love and addicted to approval, that's going to cause us a lot of problems. And so we want to reduce that need. And in reducing that need, then we will be able to be more calm, more relaxed, and have healthier relationships. And one of the things that I think I pointed to in the video, there's been a while since I've done that video, but one of the things I would point to would be oftentimes we are needing that love and approval so much from others that we are not focusing on giving love to ourselves, giving approval to ourselves, and then we need that from others less. We're not as, it's not a game in which, well, if I don't get it from them, then there is none. No, if I don't get it from them, or if you're saying I don't need it as much, where do I get that from? I get that from me. I get that from ourselves. We get that from us. And that's often what has been lacking and why we've been so love seeking, approval seeking, acceptance seeking. That's why we have done that. I hope that's a help, Jesse. Magnolia. How do you discuss with someone when you feel their time, work boundaries are unreasonable? Zero flexibility lines for their boundaries, but expect me, hiring them, to ignore my requirements? Ooh, that's a good question. Um, if you are the one hiring them, if you are in the leadership position, and that's a kind of a leadership question. But it also involves ourself too. But it's a leadership question where um, if I'm the boss or I'm hiring them or whatever, that hey, we need to talk about the expectations. Your time and work boundaries are unreasonable in my opinion. So you need to decide whether this is a good fit for you or not. And so I think that's where we begin to challenge that. You can have those unreasonable time and work boundaries all you want. They're just not going to fit in here. That's going to be a problem if I'm reading the question correctly. And that also, if someone has zero flexibility, that could be a problematic employee. If you're going to have zero flexibility, that could be a problem because that zero flexibility is not going to end when they get hired. It's going to continue on. And so I like to challenge that and go, this is not, these are just not how I think employees would appropriately function in this department or at our business. And then let them decide, okay, what do they say from there? What are their responses? And they could have a response all the way from, well, I'm not going to change what I believe, this is what I'm going to do. Well, if that's what you're going to do, then you may need to do it somewhere else, and that's fine. You can have those boundaries and those time issues, but that's not going to work here. And leadership is there to set up guardrails. That's a part of what leadership does. We do set up boundaries, we do set up guardrails. And if someone doesn't give a hoot about our guardrails, that I want you to work, 9 to 5. Well, I only want to work 9 to noon. You know, Well, okay, I understand that's what you'd like. That's not what we do here. Um, so, do you think you would fit in well here with that, John? Do you think you'd fit in well? Um, and then I'm not being shaming. I'm not being critical. I'm just talking about the logical consequences of zero flexibility. Is really what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the logical consequences of that with John, who I'm going to hire or want to hire, or and I might even say I really want to hire you. I think you'd really be a good person here, but not with that inflexibility. Not with that. Hope that's a help. Um, let's see here. Uh, can you share some examples of paradoxical responses to narcissistic parents so I know what not to say? I'm 21 and still living with my covert narcissist dad. Haven't been able to go to no contact yet. Okay. And again, we can do paradoxical responses with narcissistic parents. Um, but I really think you have to manage your own anxiety really, really well. The more we manage our own anxiety, because there are two factors: your anxiety level and your self differentiation level, your sense of self. If your anxiety level is down and your sense of self is high, then you can almost get away with anything with anybody because you're neutral, you're less likely going to trigger them out of your own issues. But if your sense of self is mediocre or low and the anxiety is mediocre to high, then I think we have to be careful about our responses, particularly to narcissists. And we may want to talk again back to the straight answers. Dad, that's just not something I want to do. Or I don't like that. I wish you wouldn't say that. And that's a very, straightforward boundary or response to them. Um, but I think you can do paradoxical responses. Um, and I think that's partly the intentional, disappointment is also something we can do. In other words, we go along with them in a tongue-in-cheek way. In other words, if somebody says to me, let's say a narcissist says to me, and I've had couples come in. I don't remember this example, but I'm sure it's probably something close. They come in and they go, "You're the worst therapist in the world. All we've done is fight since we met here the last time." Now, if you notice, they're taking no responsibility for their own behaviors. Their fighting is all my fault. I did it, whatever I did, or whatever I did at the last session. And they're blaming me. They want to blame me so they don't have to look at them. Now, what do I do when someone has a situation like that? Well, first of all, I don't want to argue with them and I don't want to become defensive because that's what a narcissist would expect you to do is to be defensive. And I might say, well, you're probably right. And then I stay quiet. Let them go on from there. I've already ended the argument because they brought in a rope. They're holding onto the rope. They threw it into my hand and said, "Now let's do tug of war." And what I just did was drop the rope. Oh, well, you're probably right. Well, now how can I be of help today when we meet? Um, well, what are you going to do about last week? That really messed us up. Well, I don't know how to redo last week. Last week was kind of last week. What do we need to do today to help? that's one response that would be kind of paradoxical, um, because I'm not really agreeing with them that I'm the worst therapist in the world and I've caused all their marital problems. I'm just saying in that statement, oh, you're probably right. I'm taking away the symptomatic presentation, which is, Jerry, you caused all this and made us all fight for a week, which is not their problem. I'm just setting that aside and say, let's not deal with that because that's not going to go anywhere. Let's see if we can go a little deeper with that and go deeper and find out what's really going on, and I will even say, well, can you tell me what really is going on? Because I know I can be an imperfect coach I certainly know that. I can do sessions that are not as good as other sessions. I mean, welcome to the world of being a human. Um, but I want to not be hooked by them so I could actually be a help to them. Now, I hope that gives you kind of an example, lovey dove, I think. Uh, and the as an example of a paradoxical response. And if I had a few more details, I might be able to help a little more. I've got the next question is, how do I deal with my sister who copies everything I do and turns it into competition? I want some individuality. I want to do my masters. She wants to do the same. It's so exhausting. Great question, Aquare. It's it is a great question. Um, and first of all, um, it's like, uh, how do I deal with my sister? And of course, I get this question a lot from a lot of people. How do I deal with them? And I said, well, your question already sets up the problem. You're emotionally dealing with them. Stop emotionally dealing with them. That's why we get so exhausted. We absorb them and then we're just frustrated by everything they do. And so, what we want to work towards is more detachment and differentiation. We can even do that in a paradoxical way. Speaking of Lovey Dove's question before, we can even be paradoxical and go, hey, sis, I think it's I think it's great that you want to do a master's degree. I think that's just wonderful. I wish you all the best. And tell me how it goes. That's the opposite of how you feel, right? Well, I'm flexing myself and flexing a self to change the polarity and to change the pattern between us. Just like I did with the couple that came in and said, I'm all of their problems. I'll go, okay, well, you are. Or I am. Okay, that's fine. Now where do we go? And you're telling us, hey, I'm thrilled that you want to do this master's degree. Because as long as you stay pursuing her by dealing with her emotionally and by being exhausted about it, as long as you are pursuing her with those feelings, then that pattern's probably going to continue. And so we want to begin to, what would happen, Aquare? What would happen if emotionally you gave up dealing with her, thinking about her, fussing about her, obsessing about her, and you gave up being exhausted or mad at her or frustrated that she's always competing? What would happen if you gave that all up? What would be the downsides of that? What would be the downsides? And I think that would be worth exploring to find out what those might be. Um, because again, how is being exhausted, dealing with your sister who competes with you, how does that destroy your individuality? If someone wants to compete with me and do everything I do, that doesn't have to destroy my individuality. In some ways, it's destroying theirs, not mine, if they want to copy me. Now, if she's always done that, then it's probably been an age old problem that started way back in our childhood. And that has continued. And I can understand it being frustrating. But if I gave up that frustration and did not care, what would happen? What would be the downsides again? The other thing we can work on is I am not ready to let go of my anger, exhaustion, and dealing with my sister yet. And continue to repeat that so that I can find greater calmness. Well, we have come to the end of our time, and I want to thank you all for joining me today. I hope it was a help in hearing some answers to some questions. I hope you'll join me for a workshop. Please go to the website, and I appreciate you being here today. You have a great day. Bye bye.